Hello, class. So today I will be going into chapters 2 and 3, and that will cover ethics and public speaking and listening. So, ethics and public speaking. Your goal as a public speaker is to gain a desired response from listeners, whether it's just to inform them or whether you're trying to persuade them to do something, but you're trying to get some type of desired response. However, it's not at any cost. There is a limit to that. So, speech making is a form of power, and with that power comes ethical responsibilities. For example, there was a chief financial officer for a charity, and there are rumors going around that he was embezzling money. So, what he decided to do was call reporters, do a press conference, and at the press conference with all these reporters, he stated, I assure you that no one at this charity has taken money away from the children and the families we work so hard to serve. Embezzlement is illegal and a serious breach of trust. I would never let that happen. So his presentation was very convincing. However, it was false because 2 months later, he was indicted and found guilty of stealing more than $2.5 million from that charity. So it shows that he had a goal. He was trying to get a desired response in his speech, and that was for these rumors to go away, for him to convince everybody that the rumors were false. Um, However, it was at the cost of misleading and lying to the public, to the shareholders, to the people who this money would have gone to for charity. Instead, it was going to him. So, when you're doing public speaking, you want to make sure that you are following your ethical responsibilities or duties. So, ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the issues of right and wrong in human affairs. A question of ethics arises when we have to ask a question of whether an action is moral or immoral. Is it fair or unfair? Is it just or unjust? Is it honest or dishonest? So we face these types of questions daily in all of our lives, not just for public speaking. Have you ever had the instance where maybe the cashier gave you more money than they should have? Or if you see somebody accidentally drop some money on the floor, do you say something, give it to them, or you say, "Oh, I guess it's my lucky day. I get to keep it." Or do you say something if you see a fellow student who's cheating on, a quiz or something? Or you just keep it to yourself and say, "Well, it's their loss. They're really not helping themselves." So we face these types of situations every day. So just the same, questions of ethics comes into play whenever we are public speaking and we are doing, speaking to an audience. As Plato phrased it best, in an ideal world, all public speakers would be truthful and devoted to the good of society. But that wouldn't be an ideal world. Not everybody is truthful. And history has shown us examples of this where the power of speech was used and abused, and it brought with it disastrous results. I think the example that would best fit this is Hitler and the Holocaust. He was a very effective and efficient persuasive speaker. I think one of the best. He was just able to really grab his audience attention. People really just everything that he said believed it and followed it, and he really motivated his audience. But it was for a goal that was bad. He used his power as a speaker for evil. So when you find yourself in a speech related ethical dilemma, you might not always have a straight answer. It might not always be as simple as is this right or wrong? So, not always cut and dried answers. When you have an ethical decision to make, you are guided by your values, your conscience, and your sense of wrong. So that's why not everybody might make the same decision. We all have different values, different experiences, different frame of mind. However, whenever you come across these situations, that's when you have to really, stop and process and think, well, based on my values and my conscience, what should I do? So here are the guidelines. Number one, make sure that your goals are ethically sound. So an example is World War II. Hitler's goal was wrong. Politicians who betray the public for personal gain, that goal would be wrong. Business leaders who defraud investors of millions of dollars, preachers who lead lavish lifestyles at the expense of their religious duties. All of these are examples of public speaking goals that are ethically wrong. On the other hand, helping disadvantaged kids, improving the quality of education, paying tribute to a fellow worker, supporting Habitat for Humanity or some other organization as such, all of these wouldn't even be questioned about their goal because we know that those are ethically sound. Number two, you always want to be fully prepared for each speech. You might think, well, I was tired. I had a lot of other things to do. So, I didn't really have time to prepare for my speech. I didn't really have time to really develop my speech. Not a big deal. But if you think about it, when you present your speech, whatever time is allotted to you, let's say 30 minutes. So if a person makes a really bad 30-minute speech to an audience of only 20 people, so that's only 30 minutes of their own time, but that speaker wastes 10 hours total of the audience put together. That's time that they can't get back. So it's crucial at an ethical standpoint that when you present or talk, you be fully informed about your subject because you have an ethical responsibility to consider the impact on the audience. And therefore, you want to make sure that you're fully prepared so that you do not communicate erroneous or misleading information or advice. An example of that would be, let's say you're doing a speech about the signs of suicide. And there's many signs, and you say, you know what, I don't really have time to, present all of this. I'm just going to pick a few. So if you don't give the full information and the full scope of what to look for from the audience, what if they're in a situation where, maybe a friend or a family member or somebody was giving them, signs of suicide, but they didn't have that full scope. It wasn't presented fully for them, so they missed something. No matter the topic, no matter who the audience, you need to explore your speech topic as thoroughly as possible. So you need to investigate the whole story, not just the story that lines up with what your belief or your opinion is. You have to learn about all sides of the issue. You have to learn about the competing viewpoints. What are the viewpoints that go against mine? Not only because it's ethically sound, but it helps you also to maybe have a better argument. If you know what those competing viewpoints are, you can counter those viewpoints with your arguments and your evidence. So you want to get all the facts and all the facts right. Not only will this give you a better speech, but you'll also fulfill one of your major ethical obligations. The third guideline for ethical speaking is be honest in what you say. So nothing is more important in ethical speech making than honesty. The public speaking rests on the unspoken assumption that words can be trusted and people will be truthful. Without this assumption, then there is no reason really for one person to believe anything that another person says. So when we are going up to make a speech, the audience has the assumption that what you say is going to be the truth. So use careful judgment, though, when you are presenting. Just because something is truth doesn't mean it's always necessary, though. So an example of this is, let's say that you're going to make a speech and you're at a peaceful protest. But there might be something that if you say, there's a very high chance or probability that this protest will then become violent, people are going to get angry, and people can get hurt. So you really want to think about what you say, how you say it, and how it's going to impact the actions of your audience. So you don't want to juggle statistics. You don't want to quote out of context. You don't want to misrepresent sources or give only half truths that support your speech. You want to make sure that you're giving all of the information, that the information is necessary and relevant, and think about how your speech or what you say can impact other people. Number 4, avoid name calling and other forms of abusive language. I think as kids, we can remember Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, obviously, we've learned that's not true. Some words can, be very hurtful and stay with you. So really think about words can leave psychological scars. So no name calling. Name calling is the use of language to defame, demean, or degrade individuals or groups. Name calling is also a very destructive social force because when we use certain terms or names repeatedly and systematically over time, then it kind of reinforces those negative attitudes or prejudice against that group or that individual. So we want to avoid any prejudice. We don't want it to lead to hate crimes and civil rights violations. You also want to note that this is not an issue about being politically correct. It's an issue about respecting the dignity of diverse groups in contemporary society. The other problem with name calling is it poses the ethical problem when it's used to silence opposing voices. So that's where we have a right to speak our mind, but because your opinion is different from ours, then we want to silence you. That's not right. Just because you don't agree with it, everybody has a right to express their opinions. Of course, preferably professionally and respectfully to everybody, but they have a right just as well. Number 5, you want to put ethical principles into practice. So what that means is being ethical means behaving ethically all the time, not only when you're in public, not only when you're in the limelight, but all the time, not only when it's convenient. So in your book, you'll see that there's actually, for this chapter, a checklist for ethical public speaking, something that you want to look over before you present or as you're preparing your speech to see, am I meeting all my duties, my ethical responsibilities as a public speaker? Now let's talk about plagiarism. That is when you present another person's words or ideas and pass them as your own, to give the impression you have written or thought something yourself when you have actually taken it from somewhere else. So you have to remember that anything that you take from someone, you need to give them credit. Plagiarism as a student can lead to many consequences. It can be maybe you get a failing grade, you get expelled from school, or you have to retake that class again. So that's something you definitely want to avoid. It's not worth it. That's time and money that you don't get back when you could have just given credit for those words. In the professional world, it can lead to forfeit your good name. Anytime people hear your name, it's tarnished. You don't have credibility. It can also damage your career. If you can't get hired anywhere, do you change careers? Do you have to get another degree? What do you do? And you could also get sued for large amounts of money. So no matter whether it's in the academic, the professional, or even personal role, you want to avoid plagiarism. So I actually had an example of plagiarism in college. I had taken a course, and the semester after that, a acquaintance took the same course, and they had asked me for my assignments just to kind of get an example of what the teacher was looking for. I didn't really think much of it until quite a few requests from that same student for my assignments. I was worried that my teacher would then say, hey, this sounds familiar, and think that I was actually part of that plan. So just to make sure, I talked to my professor and just said, hey, could you just compare what I submitted last semester compared to what students are submitting this semester? And sure enough, this student was submitting all of my assignments word for word, picture for picture, didn't change anything except for my name and their name. I wasn't trying to cause any problems for them, but I didn't want to get expelled, or any problems for myself as well, because somebody else was taking my work. So you always want to be careful with that. There are different types of plagiarism. You have global plagiarism, so that's basically where you steal an entire speech from somewhere else and pass it as your own. So with my example, and my situation or experience would be global plagiarism. There's patchwork plagiarism, and that is where you just steal ideas or language from 2 or 3 different sources and pass them as your own. And then there's incremental plagiarism. That's where you feel to give credit for particular parts of a speech that are borrowed from other people. So that would be examples of like quotations or when you paraphrase their words. So what are quotations and paraphrases? Quotations, that's when you quote someone directly and it's basically verbatim, word for word, but you must attribute those words to that person. So anytime that you quote somebody else's words, you have to say, even in your speech, according to, or so-and-so said, and give them credit for those words. When you paraphrase, that's where you restate that information or you summarize somebody else's information, but in your own words. Even though you're rephrasing it in your own words, the idea is not originally yours. So you still have to give credit to that person. Internet and plagiarism. So anytime you get information from the internet, you can't give credit to the internet because the internet is not who came up with the idea. So you can't just say, according to the internet, this and this and this. So when you get information from the internet, you have to cite that in your speech as well, providing maybe the title of the internet document, the author or the organization that's responsible for the document. Not all documents are going to have an author. For example, government websites, like the CDC or things like that. It's just a document, but there's no author. So you would just say, based on the organization, on their website, this is where I got the document. The date on which that document was last updated, you'll usually have that at one of the corners of the website, and the date which you actually accessed that report. So when you present your speech, you'll need to identify the internet sources, specify the author or the website. And then you have guidelines for ethical listening. So you want to listen courteously and attentively, avoid prejudging the speaker, maintain the free and open expression of ideas. So listening, being courteous and attentive listening, you are giving your fellow speakers the same courtesy and attention that you would want from them. You want to come prepared to class or to the presentation, ready to listen and to learn. You want to be conscious of the feedback that you're sending the speaker. The feedback is usually nonverbal. So you want to think about, what is my face saying? What are my hands saying? Am I looking at the clock a lot? Am I looking at my watch? Am I yawning? Am I zoning out? When people are presenting, you can see that, and that's really going to affect the speaker. Think their confidence, they're not even interested. Or if somebody's smiling, nodding, leaning forward, that's telling the speaker that the audience is really attentive and listening and interested. So that helps the speaker's confidence go up as they're speaking. So just be conscious of that nonverbal feedback you're giving. You want to be aware and show your support and encouragement by those facial expressions. So not only don't give negative ones, but be aware and try to give positive ones. Keep in mind the power that you have as a listener over the speaker's confidence and composure as they're speaking. You want to avoid prejudging the speaker. You can't judge a speech based on the name of the speaker, their lifestyle, their appearance, or reputation of the speaker. You want to strive to understand and respect speakers before evaluating and responding to their messages. So this does not mean that you have to agree with everything the speaker has to say, but your aim or your goal is to listen carefully to their ideas, assess the evidence and reasoning that they use, and then from there, critical thinking, you reach an intelligent judgment based on that information about the speech. Maintain the free and open expression of ideas. So listeners, we have an obligation to maintain the right of speakers to be heard. You don't have to agree, but give them that right to speak their mind or on that topic. So it's important to keep in mind that ensuring a person's freedom of speech to express their ideas doesn't mean agreeing with those, just letting them speak it. You can completely disagree with the message, but still support the speaker's right to express it. So that was chapter 2 on ethics and public speaking. Now we're going to talk about chapter 3, listening. There's actually a difference between hearing and listening. You have hearing, and that's the physiological process, or basically the science behind it. There's a vibration of sound waves. They hit our eardrums, firing electrochemical impulses to our brain, and our brain says, hey, that's sound, and we try to process it. Then there's listening. That's the actual process that involves paying close attention to and making sense of what it is we're hearing. Listening is important as a speaker because it's the way that we get most of our ideas and information from, whether you're listening to another speaker in person, listening to it, on the computer, in a video, or in some other form of audio. So listening, active listening is important. Listening and critical thinking. We can identify 4 kinds of listening. The first one is appreciative listening. That's where just listening to something for pleasure or enjoyment, like music, a comedian, or an entertaining speech. There's empathetic listening. That's where it's to provide emotional support for the speaker. So like a psychiatrist listening to a patient, or maybe just lending a sympathetic ear to a friend in distress. Then we have comprehensive listening. That's to understand the message of a speaker. An example of that would be attending a class lecture or listening to directions or watching this PowerPoint. And then there's critical listening. That's the important one related to public speaking. That's where you have to evaluate a message for the purpose of, am I going to accept this or am I going to reject it? Such as a sales pitch. Am I going to buy this or not? Do I need it or want it or not? Or a campaign speech. Do I line up with, this politician's values or with what they're proposing to do with the city or the town? Now let's talk about what are the 4 major causes of poor listening. The first one is not concentrating. So our brains are so efficient, we talk at a rate of about 120 to 180 words a minute. But our brain can process way more than that, 400 to 500 words in a minute. So our brains are so much faster than the rate that we speak. And that's actually a problem for us because during that extra time after our brain already processed what it heard, that time is called spare brain time. And that's a problem for good listening because during that extra time, that's when our brains tend to wander off and think about other things. So for example, let's say you're listening to a speech and the speaker is talking about, recycling and how all these plastic bottles are washing up on beaches. And then right away, your brain thinks, oh, spring break is coming up. The beach would be a great place to go. I should really start thinking about it. I wonder if there's any Airbnbs. So your brain's wandering off and now you're not listening to what the speaker is saying. So it's good to be aware of it. You can't control it all the time. It's just natural for our brains to do that. But if you're aware about the problem and know what it is and why it happens, then it helps you to try to zone back into the speech and the message. The other cause of poor listening is the complete opposite of that. That's when you're trying to listen too hard to the message. When you're taking notes and you're trying to remember all the names, all the dates, all the places, and everything that the speaker is saying. Because we're focusing on all the little details, we're not getting all of the most important information. So we miss the speaker's main points because we're focusing on too much information that might not even be that relevant. And because of that, we miss the important information. The third reason for poor listening is jumping to conclusions. We tend to do this when we are sure we know what a person means. We do not actually listen to what they say. So we prematurely reject the speaker's ideas as boring or misguided. But you want to remember that nearly every speech has something to offer you, whether it be information, it might be a different point of view or another technique, that we would be cheating ourselves if we prejudge and choose not to listen, if we close ourselves off and zone out for the rest of that speech. Fourth reason is focusing on delivery and personal appearance. Sometimes we judge people by the way they look or speak and don't listen to what they say. It's easy to become distracted by maybe a speaker's accent, personal appearance, or vocal mannerisms and lose sight of the message. So focusing on the speaker's delivery or personal appearance is one of the major sources of interference in the speech communication process, and it's something that we need to guard against and try to avoid. So now that we know the major causes for poor listening, what can we do to be a better listener? Well, number one, you want to take listening very seriously. You want to be an active listener. So that's when you're giving your undivided attention with a very genuine effort to understand the point of view. You want to resist distractions. So if you see that you're getting distracted, make a conscious effort to pull your mind back to what the speaker is saying. Don't be diverted by appearance or delivery. So think about Abraham Lincoln or Gandhi or Stephen Hawking. Their appearance and delivery, you would think, could be distracting since it's very different. But on the other hand, you want to try not to be misled if the speaker is unusually attractive. Just because they're good looking, they can be, feeding you false information or, trying to get you to sign up for a pyramid scheme. So always be aware of what the message is, not the package it comes in. You want to suspend judgment. So your aim of active listening is to set aside your own prejudices, your own frame of reference, and desires as to experience as far as possible. So the speaker's world from the inside. So basically, you want to put everything aside the way that you understand and what you know, and open up to what can I learn? Is there something different or new that this speech or this speaker can provide me? It is said that a closed mind is an empty mind. So you always want your mind to be open, willing to at least learn. It doesn't mean that you have to accept everything, but at least it will open up your viewpoint of what other people see or understand. You want to focus your listening. So skilled listeners do not try to absorb speaker's every word, but they focus on the specific things in that speech. Develop note-taking skills. When done properly, it's a surefire way to improve your concentration and keep track of the speaker's ideas. Focus your listening in depth. So you want to listen for the main points. You want to listen for the evidence. Is it accurate? Did they get it from objective sources? Is it relevant to what the speaker's claims are? And is it sufficient or enough to really support that speaker's point? You want to listen for technique. What methods did they use to gain the audience attention? Were they pulling on their heartstrings? Were they working more on logical concepts? How do they establish credibility? Did they tell you maybe they have lots of experience on that topic, or they did lots of research on that topic? Did they even tell you, who they are and why they have a right or credibility to talk on that topic? So you need to also learn or see how they organize their speech, study the speaker's language. Is it accurate? Is it clear? Vivid and easy? Was it easy to follow? So you want to focus on the speaker's strengths and weaknesses as well, for you to really capture that speech and see whether you are going to accept or reject it, but also to learn things for you of, hey, that's a good strength. That's something I want to pick up. And that's a weakness that I definitely want to avoid. And a good idea to do is develop note-taking skills. Whenever you are listening to a speech, you want to avoid writing everything that the speaker says, because then you'll just have way too much information, not really know what to do with all that. You do not want to try and wait for them to only say things that grab your attention, because then you'll be left with nothing much. You want to write down the main points and the evidence that they're using to support those main points. So a good type of outline when you are listening to a speech and you're trying to take notes is doing a keyword outline. And that is basically a very brief note on the speaker's main points and evidence in a rough outline form. I apologize for this screenshot. It is very small, But in your textbook for chapter 3, you'll see this example about the shark population and what would be an ideal example of a keyword outline, how the person taking the note would basically just take notes of those main points and the supporting evidence that the speaker provided. So that is chapter 2 and 3. Please let me know if you have any questions. You have a great day.